Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the National Postal Museum's program in appreciation of letters, their historic and personal value. My name is Jessie Coyne. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am the director of the Department of Education and Visitor Experience at the museum. Before we begin tonight, we would like to take a moment to gratefully acknowledge the Piscataway people on whose ancestral lands the National Postal Museum stands today. We pay respect to all Native peoples, past and present, and their deep connections to land, waters, and community. After our program this evening ends, we encourage you to take a moment and learn more about Native American histories within your communities. And we invite you to explore the resources available through the National Museum of the American Indians website, a link to which can be found in the chat. A few housekeeping things before we begin this evening. First, we wanted to remind you, if you haven't already noticed, that we are recording tonight's program. Once all the post-production work is complete, we'll post it on the museum's YouTube channel, and a link to that is also being dropped in the chat for you to review. We also have a live captioner joining us today, so if you have any difficulty in accessing the captions, please let us know via the Q&A function so we can better assist you. Speaking of the Q&A function, that is the only means of communicating to any of our panelists this evening. So whether you have a question or comment related to your technology, the presentations you hear tonight, or other connections you've made over the course of the program, please use the Q&A to share it with us. For your information, our evening will be divided into a few parts. Each of our speakers will present individually, each of our speakers will present individually on a topic relevant to their work, followed by a joint Q&A session moderated by myself. So any of those aforementioned questions that you might submit into the Q&A specifically about the content, they will be sharing with us aloud tonight during the Q&A session and answered. If we don't get to your question before our time is up, I'll be sharing each of their contact information at the end of the program. So please feel free to reach out to them directly if you choose. And lastly, I will send a follow-up email to all of you joining us this evening. So if you miss any of the links or any of the speakers' contact information, or if you're interested in any further resources related to our topic tonight, don't stress, all of that will be shared in that email tomorrow. So with all of that, I would like to introduce our speakers, if they could all come on screen for us real quick. In no particular order, we have Lynn Heidelbaugh. She's the curator at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. And I'm so sorry, I'm seeing that you're not seeing her. Let me fix one thing. I'm so sorry. Video. Nope. It's amazing how no matter how many times I do this, I'm always going to get something, right? Lynn, why don't we all have each of you come off mic for 1 second so that at least when you speak, they'll be able to hear you. So I'm so sorry about that. In no particular order, going back to that, we have Lynn Heidelbaugh. She is a curator at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum, specializing in the history of the U.S. Postal Service. She has published essays and created several exhibitions about military mail, including Letters Home, in the beautiful publication Smithsonian Civil War Inside the National Collection, as well as the exhibition My Fellow Soldiers, Letters from World War I, for which she received a Smithsonian Secretary's Award for Research in 2018. And trust me when I say that that is a very high honor to receive that award within the Smithsonian. Liz McGuire, if you could say hi real quick.
Hello.
Is the creator and curator of Flea Market Love Letters, a digital archive of vintage love letters. Started in 2017, the archive has since shared over 500 letters from 20 different, what she calls series, and I'm sure she'll explain more of that later, all sourced from flea markets and online auctions. Liz is interested in the social history of the letters, as well as the preservation of the handwritten letter as a form of meaningful communication today, hence the reason we invited her to join us this evening. While Liz is based in Dublin, Ireland, and please let me publicly thank you one more time for staying up so late to join us this evening. She is originally from the US, where the archive began before moving with her overseas in 2018. The archive and Liz's work for letters have been featured on Sky News, The Guardian, Ireland AM, and many other outlets. And last but certainly not least, Thomas Paone, or did I say that right? I know I've asked you that before and now I've forgotten. Paone?
Paone, yeah.
Okay, my sincerest apologies. curates the Lighter Than Air collection, which includes balloons, blimps, and airships at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. His research focuses more specifically on ballooning in the Civil War, as well as the use of airships and blimps in America. He is co-author of Milestones of Flight, the Epic of Aviation with the National Air and Space Museum, as well as Between Home and the Front, Civil War Letters of the Walters Family with our other speaker, Lynn Heidelbaugh. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom now, who'll be speaking more about letters from the Walters family. Tom?
Thank you very much. Let me get this going. All right. Thank you again, everyone. I'd like to echo Jesse's thanks for joining us this evening. We are so grateful that we get to share this collection of letters with all of you, because it is something that we have been fascinated with, and we love just sharing it with others so they can see what amazed us about it. So I'll be talking this evening about this collection of letters between a family during the Civil War, and the book that we turned this collection into, called Between Home and the Front, Civil War Letters of the Walters Family. And this collection is one of the few collections of family correspondence at the National Postal Museum. And it is numerous letters between various members of the Walters family, a family that was living at Indiana at the time. And they range from 1859 for the earliest letter to 1868, which is some of the mail pertaining to kind of the aftermath of the war. The earliest letters, what is seen here on the screen on the right, this is actually from Rachel Ward to David Walters during their courting in July of 1859. And it was a very appropriate letter to kind of start the collection off with. And again, at first, you can really look at this as just a grouping of individual papers and documents. But when you really start to dig into them, this wonderful story really emerges and showcases the importance of letters, not only for someone's individual family history, but also to reveal so many more details about history that we can sometimes miss. This collection was taken, Lynn and I took this grouping of letters, we transcribed them, and we placed them in chronological order, and this wonderful story emerged with all sorts of details showcasing the impact that the American Civil War had on families, including views from both the home front and the battlefield. And that is a very rare thing to see, this kind of complete collection of views from both sides, both home and the battlefield. So as we worked with these letters, we really got to know these individual family members and really started to see their personalities emerge. And there was 5 main letter writers are part of this collection. The first is Rachel Jane Ward, as I mentioned in the previous slide, who married David Walters in December of 1860, becoming Rachel Walters. And she really becomes this nexus of communication. She is the hub that really helps keep the family together and keep information flowing between home and the different parts of the battlefield where the brothers of the Walters family are stationed. She's critically important in keeping kind of this line of communication open and really making sure that everyone knows what's going on, and helping keep morale up between all the brothers as the events of the war shake the family. The next major writer was David Walters, her husband. He had joined the 5th Indiana Cavalry and found himself stationed mostly in the middle of the country at that point, which was Kentucky and Tennessee, before being moved to Georgia. Isaac Walters is the next major letter writer in the series. He is the brother of David. He joins with the 20th Indiana Infantry, and he finds himself in the Eastern Theater of the war, mostly fighting in Virginia. John Wesley Walters, another brother of David, he joins the 46th Indiana Infantry, and he finds himself in what was called the Western Theater War, which at that time was along the Mississippi River. And he finds himself and his unit fighting in Mississippi and Louisiana. And then finally, John Louderback makes up, he writes several letters. He's a friend of David, who later on becomes David's company commander. And again, we, through this grouping of letters, which again at first seemed very distinct and individual, but as we sorted them and put them together, we really learned of their personal experiences through this tumultuous time. We experienced the war through their eyes, as opposed to what you can find in a history book that gives an overview of the conflict. The individuals shared how the different historical events that occurred at that time impacted them personally, and you could really see how they struggled and how they coped with what was going on. And it really showcased how people in a rural area of Indiana, that they were mostly a farming community, reacted to some of these major events that are happening at this time, including the draft, and how a soldier who fought for over 4 years in the war reacted to Abraham Lincoln's assassination. So all of these major historical moments that we know of, that we study today, we were able to see just with such a personal connection to them. And one of the many exchanges that we were able to really dig into as we studied these letters and dug into them was one between Rachel and her husband David in April of 1864. This really highlighted the strength of this collection, because it again showcased this communication that was happening, even though Rachel and David were separated by the war and his service in the military. This particular letter that we see here was written by Rachel on April 18th, 1864, and it really showcases how these letters were being used to have a conversation. The husband, she wrote to him and he wrote back to her, answering questions, responding to concerns. She expressed the hardships that she was struggling with at home, and he expressed the hardships that he was experiencing on the battlefield. This letter is a single sheet letter, which here we see the back of it. And Rachel writes about having to take up a job as a teacher. She had not worked before, but with David off war, she had taken up this job to better support herself and their son Willard, who they often call Willie, back at home. And she starts off the letter expressing how she was feeling ill because she had walked to school with her shoes, which were not in the best of shape, and it had caused her to get a chill because her feet had gotten wet. And she brings up spending some money that David had sent her on clothing, and explains how guilty she felt spending this money, because she didn't want to kind of enjoy all the things of life off of the money that David was sending home since he was off at war. And she writes, "I've got me a new cloak and hat at last. The cloak cost $6.75 and hat cost $2.80. I would not mind wearing them if you was here to see me wear them, but as it is, I do not feel right, for the soldiers' wives here have the name of spending all that their husbands send them for finery, and I am determined that I will not do that." So again, she's really writing here about how the war is having an impact on her personally, and how the social climate around town is impacting her decisions, and what she will and will not buy because of what is going on, and not wanting to appear to be, again, living in finery while her husband is away. And David responds to this about a week later, April 26th, 1864. So this does again showcase how quickly the mail was moving, allowing these conversations to occur. And he is unhappy and downright angry to hear that she is suffering and then struggling with, the social anxiety of spending money that he sent her. He writes, "My dear, have you went to teaching school without getting you a pair of boots? If you have, it grieves me very much if you have not got money enough to make you comfortable. Let me know by the return of mail and I will spare you some. My dear, I thought you was old enough to not mind what people says. I want you to buy anything that makes you and Willie happy." So again, David is, admonishing her here for not living comfortably. He doesn't want her to suffer, even though he's not there, and is responding, again with this unhappiness to her displeasure. He goes on to write how he is struggling with being absent at home, and again hearing that they are struggling, that they are suffering. And he adds a postscript in which he states, "If I had a hold of some of them, they would wish they never saw a soldier." At this point in the letter, David actually writes the only curse words that appear in the entire collection, highlighting just how angry this whole situation made him. And he considers the cowards speaking against the comfort of his wife and child to be downright improper, because they shouldn't be speaking against them while he's at the front. And at the very end of this letter, he admonishes her, "If you have not got a pair of boots, go and get them immediately." So again, this is an example of how David is still trying to lead his family, even though he's not home, and how the mail is really allowing them to stay connected to even the quote unquote trivial items in their lives. They're still sharing that, they're still being a part of each other's lives and experiencing that. So we took these two letters between members of the Walters family, with additional correspondence in the collection, and we were able to put them together to form this book, Between Home and the Front, which really allows the reader to see that these are real people with real emotions, facing some of the most difficult problems anyone in the nation had ever faced before. And it really creates just this wonderfully captivating story for those willing to dig into them. Lynn and I were able to take these transcriptions, add some context and notes, and then form this book. And it's now available from Indiana University Press for anyone who wants to learn more about the Walters family. And I encourage you to do so. It really is just such a fascinating work to see, kind of down to the granular level, how much the war had an impact on just one family, and how that represents so many stories that occurred throughout the nation. But the only way we were able to publish this book was because of a very generous donation to the collection in the Smithsonian, which Lynn will now discuss.
Thank you so much, Tom. And it's been a great pleasure to work with Tom on this project, and a privilege to really get into this collection. I want to tell you a little bit about how it came to the Smithsonian, and about how collections like these personal letters often come to museums and archives, and give you some behind the scenes on that. But also, if you're interested in doing the same yourself, some tips for that. And as Tom explained, what we have found so intriguing about these papers is not only that spirited exchange, but also some of the companion pieces, the envelopes, the items enclosed with the letters, this family's documents in which they worked to try to secure a military pension at the end of the war. They all gave us insights into how the family was communicating and their lives. And really, there's nothing else like dealing with the tangible pieces of those mail, like the pieces that you see here. But for much of our work, we were using, of course, images and our transcripts. But I'm sure all of those who appreciate historic letters, there's really nothing like going back to the real thing. And looking at these items that the Walters letters exchanged, and of which we have over 180 items in total in this collection, which includes everything from the letters and the envelopes. It really showed us things about the stamps, the cost of postage, the kind of inks that the writers were choosing, the style of stationery, and of course their handwriting, each which has a certain personality. And all of these gave us hints about the people, but also the social and economic status of the family and what was available to them in the material culture of writing, sending, and also even reading the mail, in the ways that they used phrases about who was sharing letters. And the letter here is an example, along with its envelope that it was enclosed in by David Walters when he was sending that note to his wife, Rachel, along with a printing issued by his regiment while they were on service in Kentucky in a very tumultuous time and having declared martial law. So that's what that item in the middle of the view there is. And all of these pieces we put together, and they all relate to each other, including this entire collection, and weaving those in between the correspondence and coming to understand those personal stories and also that background history, which I think is what draws us to these collections of historic letters, is about that communication and how people are expressing themselves in the moment in letters. And it really is an amazing resource to come back to and look at it. And it's not possible, it would not have been possible without the donation of the descendants of Rachel and David Walters. And I'll share a little bit about how that donation happened in the next slide. And it started with the centennial of the Civil War. In 1964, the grandson of Rachel and David Walters contacted the Smithsonian, Arthur Walters. And Arthur was the son of the couple that you see here, who's Willard and Amelia Walters. Of course, Willard is the son of David and Rachel, who is often spoken about in the letters by Rachel. And that first set of things that came to the Smithsonian was offered to, at that time, which was the National Museum, and 7 used envelopes came to the Philatelic Division, which at the time was really interested in those used envelopes, all of which were illustrated and printed with patriotic messages. It was 27 years later that the family reapproached the Smithsonian, now ready to offer the over 170 items of the Civil War collections of the papers that really has those amazing stories in those letters of Rachel, David, Isaac, and John Wesley. And when the family brought that to the attention again, it was through June Walters Leonard. And it was after she had transcribed them herself, studied them, and it was not a parting with the collection, because the National Postal Museum, like all historical organizations, makes these collections available to the public. And that's really one of the motivators of many people who are choosing to donate to collections. So a little bit more about how that happens with donations to the public institution. And our next slide, Tom. So this one's got a lot of text in it, but don't be overwhelmed. I first want to give you a little bit of tips of, if you're thinking about donating a collection that you might have, or this also pertains to like what goes into that kind of work when museums and archives, historical societies prepare collections like the Walters letters correspondence for access. And many of our collections are made possible by private personal donations, like the Walters family descendants. And many of the motivations are when you share those similar interests as the mission of the museums or archives to provide public access, and also to try to preserve these significant collections for the future, for researchers and educational use. So if you're considering that you want to ensure that collections will be saved and have access, a museum is a great place to turn to. Museums will catalog and preserve the items, and they'll make them available through research, through exhibitions, public programming, and so forth. But it's important that you have a conversation with the museum staff if you're thinking about wanting your collection in the collection of a museum or archive. You need to kind of shop around. So don't be shy about contacting a few different organizations and ask about what are the content areas that they specialize in, who are the kind of visitors and audiences. Do these connect to the collection that you know that you want to donate? And because you may know it very well. But if you don't know it very well, but you've been attracted to that collection, you've purchased it or you've inherited it, and you think that others need to see it, if you don't know much about it, go ahead and tell the museum that too. It's an opportunity to try to fill in the gap through research and find out more about the items. So when you're talking to a museum and archive, the staff will ask you a lot of questions, or you can come prepared with many of these answers. Thinking about letters, they'll ask you who are the correspondents, what kind of relationships are in these letters. They may ask you if you have any documentation about people, and everybody loves photos of who's writing and receiving the letters. As much as their handwriting tells us something, there's nothing like seeing an image of the face. So they'll also ask you who owns the letter set. Maybe it's just you, but in many circumstances, we've been approached by multiple family members who are ready to donate. If you've purchased them, do let the museum know that you purchased them. And if you have any idea about the previous owner, let us know about that as well. And it also comes down to how many things do you have as well. So is your collection going to fit a whole bunch of boxes, or is it just maybe one or two postcards? Museum and archives may be interested in a whole different range of materials and different range of sizes and items that you'll have to donate. And speaking of material, museums do care about the preservation of those items. So if they've not seen it, you don't have photographs to show them of the letters, they'll often ask, sort of, what's the condition of it? Is it good, fair, or poor? And what a museum staff member like me who's asking that question is wanting to know is, are there tears on that paper? Is it faded or fragile? Does it smell smoky? And those are the kind of things that you don't have to be an expert to tell us what the condition is. You know if it's good, fair, or poor. But most importantly, it's about your expectations of what happens to those letters in a collection and how you want to share those. And certainly donation may not be what you're looking for with your collection. And there's so many more rewarding things or alternative rewarding things that you can do with your collection. Shall just briefly mention the next slide, please. And of course, there's ways that you can share your collections, such as books. There's options for self-published books, going online with social media. There's a lot of collections that people share through blog series or their own websites about historic letters, as well as art projects. And a note about if you're really getting into the history of it and you're researching, one way that you can keep going back to refer to particular handwritten letters is to transcribe them. And it helps you maybe not go to handling the originals over and over again, but it also may help others access some of the difficult handwriting you may have encountered. So if you do transcribe your letters, my word of advice is to be consistent. And while you're working with your letters, do consider ways that you can preserve them, looking for stable storage and environmental conditions, which you can see in some of the tips on the Postal Museum's website. But I'm really looking forward to hearing Liz McGuire talk about her approach to handling and storing vintage letters. So I'll hand it over to Liz now.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Tom. That was great. Here we go. Now we have to do the fancy magic swift of hands. There we go. Okay. So thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Tom, for having me on this evening to talk about my favorite thing, which is vintage letters. And thank you to everyone who's here this evening. I know that you've enjoyed Lynn and Tom's presentation as much as I have and as much as I've enjoyed reading the book. So I will kick off. Here we go. My name is Liz. I'm the creator and curator of a project called Flea Market Love Letters. And Flea Market Love Letters is a digital archive of vintage love letters, but more on that in a little moment. I work in marketing, but in my spare time, I am an ambassador for the handwritten letter. So while I live in Dublin, Ireland, I enjoy spotting our familiar green pillar box post boxes and occasionally dressing up as them. And when I'm back in the US visiting my family and friends, I like to be elbow deep in boxes of old paper on the hunt for vintage letters. Or in my spare time, I like to visit a fantastic museum in Washington, DC, which is dedicated to mail. During the pandemic, I became involved with a global pen pal exchange called Penpalooza, which introduced me to a rich and diverse community of letter writers on social media. And since then, I've had the opportunity to meet pen pals of mine in places like London, Barcelona, and Edinburgh. It's often suggested that the letter is dying, and I disagree. I believe that the letter is alive and well, but that we must do work to encourage young people to pick up their pens. And one of the ways I do that is by busting out my soapbox and speaking loud and proud about the values of letters to school groups, book clubs, and anyone who will listen. And I, of course, advocate for the letter by running my passion project, Flea Market Love Letters. And this is a total passion project. I don't profit from the archive, and any funds that are raised from it go to charity. So here's Flea Market Love Letters. Flea Market Love Letters started in 2017. And since then, we've shared some 700 vintage or found letters sourced from flea markets and online auctions. There are 22 different series or letters, collections of letters on the site from all across history, including both World Wars, the Great Depression, and even Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. It's my responsibility to treat these letters and the individuals who wrote them with dignity and respect. And it's the top of my mission statement that the project and letters featured be considered for the very real history and people they represent. The readers that connect with the project, many of whom are here this evening, so hello, see it as an accessible way to engage with social history digitally. Often I've been asked the average age of a reader of the project, and I'm proud to say, just as our letters span the decades, so do our readers. You don't have to be a romantic to enjoy Flea Market Love Letters, as there are letters between romantic partners, between sons and parents, between friends, cousins, and neighbors. I could talk for ages on the archive, but I will leave something for you to explore later. Today, I'll talk briefly about why and how I came to start Flea Market Love Letters and the methods that I use to catalog the thousands of letters in the archive. But first, I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank Tom and Lynn and Jesse and the Smithsonian team again for having me along this evening. I was so glad to write about Between Home and the Front as the October edition of the Flea Market Love Letters series, Books About Letters. Every month I read and review, as you guessed it, a book about letters, and ask, does the book in question pass the title? And Between Home and the Front absolutely does. It's been such a pleasure to hear Tom and Lynn this evening on the importance of the Walters family letters and why books like Between Home and the Front and family letter collections matter for the future. Tom and Lynn have pulled back the onion skin pages to reveal very real and very relevant implications of these rare letters themselves. The Walters often reference paper quality, faintness of ink, frequency of letters arriving or being dispatched, so much the same of many of the letters across history that have been featured in the Flea Market archive. The Walters letters are introduced by an in-depth yet approachable research about the time period and context of the senders, making it an immersive read with lasting impact. It's approachable for the layman or woman, and this collection of letters is an entrance point into a period of American history. So whether you're a Civil War buff or a casual reader, this book is sure to spark an interest wherever your curiosity lies. And while Lynn has very kindly covered how the Walters letters came to the Postal Museum and how the museum suggests preserving your own letters, I thought we might take a look at how I preserve the letters in my archive. There are letters in desk drawers and hall closets around the world that deserve to be preserved. I believe that everyone has a letter story. It's time for letters to come out from under the bed and down from the closet shelf. With the accessibility of social media, now more than ever, sharing letters with family and friends is easier than it's ever been. Whether you choose to produce an album of family letters, cut together a slideshow, or are considering gifting a collection of family letters to a budding historian in the family, please do. Talking about letters is almost as rewarding as preserving them. Flea Market Love Letters is a community space dedicated to the preservation and appreciation of the handwritten letter. When I started the archive 5 years ago, I never could have imagined the conversations that it started. But that's what makes it special. I'm the keeper of letters, but I'm really the keeper of people's memories. The letters have come to me in various shoeboxes and shopping bags. A series can be 3 letters long, or it can be 300. Many of the letters have come to the archive through generous donations by friends and family, several of whom are attending this evening. Thank you. And while in a dream world, I would love to be able to accept more broadly donated letters, at this stage of the project, I'm unable to facilitate that, but I'm happy to help you with your own preservation journey. The first series of letters I ever shared as part of the Flea Market Love Letters collection were not the first that came into my possession. Those first letters are those that you can see on the table there, a series of 1920s letters bought for me at a flea market in New Jersey with a borrowed $5 from my mom. When I was a teenager at the time, the letters made a summer project, and it was years later that I would formalize my methodology for preserving and publishing the letters as it exists today. A friendly reminder that these are not museum quality preservation tips, rather the dollar store alternative with supplies and tools to help protect letters for a few more years. The first step always remains the same. I make sure that my workspace is clean with plenty of room to spread out. I'm sure to have plenty of binder sleeves and empty binders, or as I sometimes prefer, portfolio books. Good lighting is a must as well, as handwriting can be hard to decipher at the best of times. When you're sure that your hands are clean, your space is clean, and you've safely stowed your coffee far from threat of spillage, you can start organizing the letters chronologically. This can be done by the date itself, or in best case scenario, using the circular postmark, which will tell you the date and location the letter traveled through a post office. Once the letters are in chronological order, I put them into individual binder sleeves. You can choose to put the envelope and pages into individual sleeves themselves for easier reading. It's entirely up to you. But as Lynn mentioned, the goal here is to minimize touching the actual letters as much as possible. So whichever method you prefer is ultimately up to you. Remember that these binder sleeves are better than a plastic bag, but they are not going to protect your letters from hazards of moisture and mice. So beware that the short-term solution is better than nothing, but to always keep an eye on your letters. When the letters are in the binder sleeves in chronological order, you can put them into your own inventory. I have, for Flea Market Love Letters, I have an inventory document where I log the binder number and contents, such as the quantity of letters and time period. For instance, it's as simple as binder L for letter 31, February 43 - June 44, 28, February 1943 to June 44, 28 letters. On last count, there were 1,600 letters yet to be featured in the archive, and there are approximately 100 from World War I, 50 something from the 1920s, about 400 from World War II, and between 50 and 60 from the 1930s and 1950s. Making an inventory means that I can keep track of what letters have come into the archive, what have already been cataloged, and what letters are ready to be shared next. And believe me, there's a lot to come. The letters are then stored like you'll see on the left side. Remember, I did say this was amateur. When a series is ready to be shared, I photograph every letter and envelope, I photograph every letter and envelope. Included in those are things like press flowers, newspaper clippings, photographs, fabric slips, and more that are oftentimes the hidden treasures preserved in letters. Then I transcribe the letters and start sharing them to the archive or website. The transcription process can take a few Saturday mornings, or it can take several months, as it did in the case of one series of letters, which was 130 letters long and amounted to 144 pages of typed transcription of 57,000 words. It's a labor of love, certainly, but it's a very worthwhile one. And the letters have taught me that history is not just made up of the names in our history textbooks, but also by the men and women who have lived the everyday challenges and triumphs that found or family letters detail. So finally, here are a handful of resources that you can find on the Flea Market Love Letters site for a bit more information about preserving your own vintage letters. And when you find yourself the chaperone or champion of vintage letters, whether they're found or family, there's a certain responsibility one feels. And if you have any questions about how to get started on your own preservation project, you can please feel free to contact me via the form on the website. And I would be glad to hear about your letter story and how you are going to help keep the letter alive and well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and Lynn and Tom, if you could join us again as well. I'd love to have everybody on screen for us to begin to launch into the Q&A aspect of this evening's program. I do know that a few people have already submitted questions through the Q&A feature that Lynn and Tom have independently or individually responded to in a typed answer. So if you haven't already noticed, please check your chat and see if they've responded to you there. But if you have any other questions that you haven't already entered into the Q&A, please do so now. While we let people have some time to do that, I want to start by asking, Lynn and Tom, you shared a really great resource on the National Postal Museum's website on tips and tricks on how to, preserve your letters. And Liz, you've talked about yours, but those are kind of the two opposite ends of the pendulum, right? We've got the Postal Museum, which is very official. There's acid-free archival quality materials, and then there's Liz's, which is far more approachable, but may not have some of that same longevity because of the detail of or the precision in some of the materials that she uses. So Lynn and Tom, as curators and historians who really spend a lot of time researching original documents, I'm curious from your perspective, is it better to, do something and even if it's not perfect, do what you can? Or is it like, oh, if you can't do it right, don't do it at all?
I really appreciated Liz's approach, and I was almost laughing when I heard, out of recognition, about the keep your coffee away from things. It's the simplest steps that you can take that are the safest for the material. Don't go overboard about thinking about getting certified, etc. Do what you can, but just clean your hands beforehand. You don't need gloves. Just keep it simple, what you can put your time into. All that's going to help. And the tips that are on the Postal Museum's website, trying to make it as real as possible. When we worked on that with our then preservation specialist, I remember her saying that the important thing to think about is, if you're comfortable in a room, so will your paper items be. So it means like not too humid, not too hot, not too cold. So it's just sort of basics, and keep it above water. There you
go. I agree with that. It can be overwhelming sometimes to, if you try to get into I have to be perfect, but even just moving something out of a basement or out of an attic where the conditions might not be very good is a start. Even just putting something somewhere that is a better environment than where it had been is a great start towards long-term preservation. Don't store something near the water heater that could burst and flood everything. Just, put it someplace, slightly safer than that. And that's a great start to again, making sure that there'll be some sort of preservation, even if you're not ready to commit to putting things in binders or things like that.
That's great. That makes me feel far more confident in my ability to start tackling some of these projects of my own letters and family letters that are in my collection. Sticking with kind of, what you've been doing, Liz, and how you've been working on these letters from Flea Market, Liz is curious, Mary is curious about what method you've used to transcribe letters. And then from there, Lynn, I believe you touched on it a little bit, but if you or Tom could elaborate a little bit more on the Transcription Center at the Smithsonian, I would appreciate that.
So that is a great question, and one of the reasons why I had to get a different glasses prescription after the pandemic. because it was a lot of very scribbly handwriting and a lot of close screen time. What I use for transcription is the old school English student method of I look at it on one side and I type it into a Google Doc or a Word document on the other side. It is slow. It takes its sweet time, but I think one of the things I appreciated most about Tom and Lynn's work in the book is that their dedication to keeping the text as it actually was. So you'll see a lot of the sort of the grammatical kind of peaks and valleys and things like that that you might catch at this point are something that your word processor is going to automatically fix. So when I finish transcribing a letter, whether it be from 1918 or 1944 or whatever, I actually actively don't correct the things that Word tells me are wrong, because that's its authenticity. And some get through and some don't. But the best thing, I think, like we've kind of started out the Q&A by just sort of trying to drive home, is once you get started, it doesn't have to be perfect, but having a transcription is something that you can work off of to research the letters further without having to touch the letters originally. So once you have something to work off of for research for, you can go back and polish it.
Transcription Center? Anyone?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Transcription Center, if there's a Smithsonian crowdsourcing organization that's called Transcription Center. All the Smithsonian units can have their collections shared through that, and volunteers are asked to type away, look at the original documents. They do also audio as well. There are other organizations that do similarly crowdsourcing. It's a great way to make things more accessible, but also searchable and discoverable. So the more that you have that information of digitized, just having those words from those letters available online. If somebody's looking for some obscure term, they may find it that way. Because I can tell you, Tom and I looked up a lot of obscure Civil War terms over and over and over again, hoping to find something. And some of them were through things like letters that have been transcribed and they're online.
And if I could add to that, those are the Transcription Center that I just put the link to in the chat. That is transcription of materials that are in the Smithsonian's collection. So, you know, if you have that collection at home that you're debating what to do with, it, you know, following some of Lynn's tips and advice on potentially exploring a donation to a museum, you know, in addition to just the preservation and then the research and getting it out to the public that way. If it happens to be to join the museum's collection within the Smithsonian, there's a chance that it then has the opportunity to be transcribed as part of that Transcription Center project. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and I'm going to bring it back to the book Between Home and the Front. So Lynn and Tom, a couple questions that people are popping in the Q&A specific to you all. One is about the fate of John and Isaac Walters. So Carol Lee is very curious to know what happened to the two of them at the end of the letters that we have.
So Isaac Walters served in the Army of the Potomac in the Eastern period of the war. He fought in some of the fiercest battles of the war, but he survives to the end. He gets to go home. He's actually the one that hears about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and writes about it and how shocking it was. We have pension information that states that he lived in an old soldier's home on and off. And actually, he applies for a pension due to some suffering that occurred to him during the Battle of Gettysburg, specifically is written. So he survives the war. John Wesley Walters is wounded at the Battle of Champion Hill, which was a battle that came right before the siege of Vicksburg in the Western theater of war, which Western during the Civil War is the Mississippi River. And he survives that wound. He recovers in a hospital. He's put on light duty, so guarding things behind the front, not on, you know, in the army on the front lines anymore. He is eventually sent home, and he passes away due to illness at home later in the war. So,
and Lynette is curious if you know if either Tom I'm sorry, if either of the Walters brothers have a brick honoring them as Civil War veterans from Indiana at the Sailors and Soldiers Monument in Indianapolis. Lynette has a great grand uncle who is from Indiana and is a Civil War veteran, and they plan on getting a brick inscribed to honor them.
Oh, interesting. We have not looked at that one. I know that we do talk in the end of the book about that Tom had found a tombstone for David at a cemetery in Georgia, and how that created a conundrum for us to figure out how David had died. It had throwing that into question of some of the records that we had. So I don't know about it. That's fascinating. So thank you. We'll have to track that down. Give it a go.
Yes,
And
thank
I
you
may
very
be
much.
wrong, but I think I saw Tom subtly like doing some typing on his keyboard, so perhaps he's already started. And one more quick question specific to the Walters family and the process of publishing the book. One of our attendees this evening has learned that I learned from a published book project, I'm now reading directly from the question, so apologies, that the copyright to all letters belongs to the letter writer. Then the copyright passes down to their descendants and their consent has to be obtained. So this is from the perspective of the asker here. So I worry about publishing these private letters without obtaining their consent. Are efforts made to return these letters to the families? I don't see any last names on the letter archive. Thank you. So obviously we, in this particular case of the Walters family, we received the letters from the family as a donation to the museum. Did you then have to seek their consent for the publishing of the book, or does that content then have, is kind of owned, if you will, by the museum and has the ability to publish automatically?
This does kind of twofold. Family gave that with the donation, but also the age of these does not call it into question. Now copyright law is different in different countries, so and it can be particularly tricky for unpublished work. So a letter is an unpublished work that does usually have additional years and additional ways that passes through estates and so forth. So if you're considering publishing seriously in print, consult a lawyer on that. But they're right in terms of it is the intellectual property of the author of that letter. So even if you might have the physical item, you don't have the ideas that were written as they were written in that letter. There are ways to research it. I have found people online, family members of, we've had a lost letter, lost letters of they had come, things that had been thrown in the garbage. This was one project that I had, and a collector who was working on those, and how do you can we share those with the public, and looking for those stories of how they had gotten lost through time. And it's amazing who you can find, and if you and typically people are very happy to talk about family members. Well, again, we're coming from the Smithsonian and have that name behind us, so that does help. It may not help if you're just somebody online reaching out, but it's who knew that we do some detective work and trying to find people in phone books and so forth. I had no idea that that's where it'd end up someday with some of these letters, but
I see, Liz, you're responding, with your face and your body language. And so I do want to throw the same question to you, because of course you're also publishing, just not in, the traditional sense of physical book. So what efforts, if any, have you made and gone about for getting consent?
Sure. So the advice that I received was to basically very much along the lines of what Lynn outlined, but the principal features of the project are that I don't make a profit off of any of the material. So that's something that I mentioned at the several places on the site. At the top of talks, I always explain that it's a passion project, as well as I can say that I was concerned there was a publishing opportunity that wanted to use the letters that came up into the end of last year. And I said, here's all the information on the site, do what you want with it. And according to Penguin Random House, where the letters did end up showing up, it was all kosher. So the flag I fly is that in that regard, Penguin's legal team seemed to think that I was doing okay. Now, knock wood. But I will say that the fundamental things I try to do are just make sure that people know that, like Lynn has very clearly said, I don't own the letters. I am keeping the letters, and I have had friends and family members reach out to me that have found the project organically, that have not asked for the letters back, but they have engaged with me and engaged with the letters, and they seemed appreciative of the way that they've been presented, which is a big priority for me. But copyright is a big deal, and it is definitely something to not tiptoe around. It's important to know what you're talking about when you walk into it, and to just be confident and sure that you're doing the right thing with the individual's letters.
I say, and there's a couple more rights in it too. Privacy is something as well. We
Mhm.
typically don't publish. It seems kind of odd current addresses, even though you can find them in online and so forth. We do not do that. And there is an era of military service personnel putting social security numbers on as an identifier. So if you're working with those, redact that kind of information.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Privacy.
On a quick note, with the Walters Letter Project, we did have contact with the family members, so they were aware of our efforts in the plan to publish these, and so that there was some contact with them as well. Well, descendants of the Walters, yeah.
As I may recall from a previous program we did, that not only did you have contact with them, but have maintained contact to the point that they participated and attended some of the talks that you've done since the book came out. So clearly they've given their consent. Excuse me. Looking at the time, I think I'd like one more question to go to all of you, if you can. So Liz, what's your favorite meaning or moment that you've kind of uncovered in your letter collection over the course of the time? And then same question to Lynn and Tom, but specific to the Walters family.
Sure. I'll go quick. The one that I have recently most top of my mind was at the beginning of this year. I featured a series called The McAllister Letters, and it was about a young man and woman who were engaged, and it was during their courtship, and et cetera, et cetera. And there were a lot of really lovely, I love yous, I can't wait to be married, we're going to have a great house, we're going to have a ton of chickens, it's going to be great. It was in the 19-teens. And I think my favorite from this year's work was probably a letter from her father to the fiance, saying that she had to drop out of women's college to marry, and that while the father wished that she could have continued her education, he supported the marriage, and he believed that they would always have a home rooted in knowledge and learning because they would teach each other. And I think that that's just a very progressive attitude to have in 1914. And it's nice to see that, and it's a nice reminder to know that the letters are not all dusty old relics.
I'll go and say, Jesse, that's the hardest thing when you ask a curator, what's your favorite object, right? I think there's so many letters that really just captured my attention on these, and I liked each of the writers for very different reasons. But in terms of like researching it and feeling like, oh, I figured this out, there was one letter that Rachel had written the wrong year on, and it wasn't January where you just wrote last year's. It was in June, and it was the clues in the letter that she had spoken about some people in her hometown who had gotten married. She spoke about a cousin who had recently died. So with those two things, I could look up and find out what the date was, because nothing else was adding up in the letter of, this didn't happen in 1863, that can't be. And so it was 1864. So it was just those moments of, it's really important to try to figure out who are the people they're talking about in these letters, what are the relationships. And that was something that Tom and I worked on, is trying to, as many people as we could identify in those, and it was really hard. There were a few people that we were able to do and figure out, but there was a reference here and there to a cousin, and we still couldn't track it down to being a cousin. Anyway, long story on that one, but just correcting a date was one of those moments of, I think I kept telling Tom through an email, like, I figured it out. So
I really was struck. So I actually started on this project as Lynn's intern. So that's how I actually met the Walters letters and got involved with the project. And I remember just starting reading them, and it got, I got really into them to the point where it was, but I don't want to go. I have like 3 more letters to read for this year. I guess I have to go home. But the one that struck me was there's one where David writes to Rachel, kind of explaining why he is joining the Army. Why is he doing this? So at the time he joins the Army, they're married. They have a young son, Willie, back home. And it was somewhat uncommon for men in that kind of situation to join the Army at that time. But he does. And in fact, Isaac writes a completely separate letter stating how surprised he was that David joined the military. And I was really struck by how timeless that was, because I had seen the same attitude, the same things that Dave is talking about, duty and honor, and feeling like he had to go and do this, even though it was hard. I've seen this in so many other letters by Americans who've served in the armed forces, regardless of the era, regardless of, any what branch they were in, anything like that, that same emotion just comes up. And that was really striking to see that. I had a letter from my grandfather from World War II that kind of expressed the exact same sentiment. So just seeing this kind of thread throughout, the history of our country, that was just fascinating to me. I remember just being so struck by how it was written. And David was one of the less literate of the brothers. So the fact that he really worked to write this letter and express those feelings, it was very important to him, and you could tell.
I don't know if anyone else picked up on that, but Tom, at one point you just referred to David as Dave, and I love that you've created that personal connection with him, that you're giving him, nicknames, for lack of any other word.
Yep, I absolutely did. Yep.
Thank you all for your incredible time this evening. I appreciate all of our participants who stuck with us since we went a little long, but of course, big and immense thanks to Liz and Lynn and Tom for everything that you shared with us. I've learned so much, and I'm really eager to apply just a small fraction of what you've shared with us, with all of my personal collection of my family letters. Admittedly, it's also gotten me thinking a little bit about like maybe some upcoming holidays, and is there a potential gift in there somewhere if I can do something with them. As I mentioned to our participants, I will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with all of the links that we shared with you and more, as well as Tom, Lynn, and Liz's contact info, which I believe I already put in the chat, but if not, you'll get it in that email tomorrow. And before you go this evening, when you close, there will be an automatic pop-up of a survey and evaluation. We'd love to get your feedback on how this evening went and your thoughts about it. And we hope to see you again at another program from the National Postal Museum, a QR code of which will be available on the PowerPoint as we walk out, as we finish up. If we did not get a chance to answer your question, I see there are more in there in the Q&A. Thank you so much for participating. Please do feel free to reach out to any of our presenters this evening in your own time. And thank you all again. We really, truly appreciate it. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I can tell you from the future, Wednesday's great. Or Thursday's great. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.